This Week in Startups is brought to you by Odoo is a fully customizable and fully integrated suite of software that lets you build and scale your stack as you build and scale your business. Your first app is free forever, and right now, Odoo is offering $1,000 off your first implementation pack at odoo.com/twist. That's odoo.com/twist. Embroker. The Embroker Startup Insurance Program helps startups secure the most important types of insurance at a lower cost and with less hassle. Save up to 20% off of traditional insurance today at embroker.com/twist. While you're there, get an extra 10% off by using offer code TWIST. And OurCrowd helps you invest early in pre-IPO companies alongside professional VCs. If you're interested in investing, you can join OurCrowd for free at OurCrowd.com/twist.
Hey everybody, welcome to This Week in Startups. Super excited about today's guest because we're not going to be talking about an app today. No, we're not going to be talking about enterprise software today or venture capital and angel investing. All of those things are great. We talk about them here on This Week in Startups. But I wanted to, in 2021, open up the aperture a bit and talk about some bigger topics and how startup companies are trying to take on climate change, right? This is a big topic for us. And if you look at what happened during the pandemic, one of the most interesting things that happened was we learned what a world without a bunch of cars spewing carbon into our atmosphere would look like. And lo and behold, people could see mountain ranges they previously couldn't see. You could see the stars at night. The air suddenly got better. And we have the possibility, we have the technology already to be fully on sustainable energy that does not cause global warming and does not cause pollution. One piece of that puzzle that we have stopped using, and we'll get into it with our guest, of why we stopped using nuclear energy, fusion, why we stopped pursuing these alternate energy solutions, is a big question I have. And so today on the program, Bob Mumgaard from Commonwealth Fusion Systems is here. Welcome to the program, calling in from Boston. Yes, Bob?
Yeah, glad to be here.
Okay. Now, you've just recently raised $84 million, and you're on track for a demonstration fusion reactor by 2025. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Okay. So explain to the audience what nuclear fusion technology is and what nuclear technology is and why you're pursuing this.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, most people have, a complete dependence on fusion. They just don't know it. Like they depend on the sun. Like the way the sun is powered and 99% of the entire universe's energy gets made is through the fundamental process of fusion, where you take light elements, combine them together, and release just gobs of energy out of that process, and slowly actually build up all the elements that make like us up. And that process, we've known about it for about 100 years, actually, that's how the stars worked, but we've never actually harnessed it on Earth. The process that we talked about, nuclear power, that we use on Earth, is actually the exact opposite of that. It is taking heavy stuff and splitting it up to lighter stuff through a chain reaction. And that's what we get, about 20% of our energy from today. That's nuclear power. But there's been a big effort over the last about 50 years, really, to figure out how to build fusion power. Because if you're able to do it on Earth, you would have a really fundamentally new energy source, something that was very different than anything that we have so far.
And just to be clear, when you are doing a fusion reaction, what is actually happening? And does this exist already in the world, or are you doing this for the first time?
Yeah. So essentially what you have to do to get a fusion system to work is you have to build basically a star in a bottle. And it's like very sci-fi. It's like how you look up in comic books or Spider-Man or, old Keanu Reeves movies. And in order to do that, you have to create a machine effectively that takes materials, small amounts of fuel that is equally accessible to everyone, is everywhere. It's basically hydrogens, and combines them together at really, really hot temperatures, like hotter than the center of the sun, like 10 million, 100 million degrees. And in that process, unleashes a lot of energy by converting a tiny bit of mass to energy as the fuel turns into helium. And so we've been researching this for a long time. We understand how it works in the stars. And we actually built a whole bunch of machines on Earth, about almost 200 of them, funded by like governments at places like MIT, which is where CFS came from. And we've steadily gotten better and better and better at this, but we've never actually built a machine that will make more power out than it takes to run. So, interesting science, but not something that we're going to power the world up with. And really what we're seeing now is a generation of startups, including CFS, but also national labs, who are getting close to going above that line and making a machine that can make more power than in. And CFS is one of those companies that's attempting to do that.
So for people who have no background in this technology like myself, the amount of energy it takes to heat the hydrogen is tens of millions of degrees. So you have to power that with some energy source, correct? Is that electricity? Is that kerosene? Is that nuclear reactor? How does one heat that hydrogen? And what you're saying to me is you're spending so much heating it up to create the fusion reaction that you're actually losing energy.
Yeah. That's historically what's happened. And,
right.
And it's actually like the way you heat it up is surprisingly mundane. Like we heat it up effectively using a microwave oven. It's just like you take about 3,000 microwave ovens, maybe a little more, and you gang them together and you microwave a grain of rice. You do that for a few seconds. And if you insulate it well enough, if it's like perfectly insulated, it'll get really, 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 really hot. And if it gets hot enough and it's insulated well enough, it'll actually start to fuse just like it would. And in fact, we do this in particle accelerators all the time. And if you can get it insulated well enough, you can actually make more power from that reaction than it took to heat it. And so you're really, you're building, and when I say more power, like think about it in terms of millions, factors of millions. So in these reactions, you get 200 million times more energy out per fuel in than say burning a hydrocarbon. So that means my entire life, like my house, my whole thing, like is like fuel like this big for my entire life. And that's exactly why the stars are still here. Like if the stars were burning coal like we do today, like the stars would have burnt out after 5,000 years. Like we would never even have this. But because they're doing fusion, they're billions of years old.
And when you said like this amount, you held up your hands to essentially what would be like a pint glass of beer.
Yeah, exactly.
Since you're from Boston, I'll use an analogy that you can relate to. It's like a pint glass, right? That's the amount of fusion that would have to occur. And so let me ask a really stupid question. When the sun has always been amazing to me that it burns in what seems to be such a predictable way that we can have an existence on Earth for some millions of years. How is the sun stable? And it doesn't just go poof and burn out or explode in a colossal cataclysmic event. It's almost like it's so perfectly designed to send the exact amount of heat.
Yeah. It's a good question. So actually, I'm a plasma physicist by training. So this is like going back to grad school here. And it's a good question. So the way the stars actually work is they're in equilibrium by their very nature, that the gravity is pulling everything really, really close. And it's basically building its own thick blanket to keep heat in. And at the core, it's getting hot enough and dense enough that fusion actually starts to happen. And that produces heat, which wants to make the whole thing expand. And so the sun, actually, it's not perfectly stable. It actually has cycles where it expands and contracts ever so slightly. And we can actually track those. And we do track those things like sun cycles and things. Not quite sure exactly how it all works yet. But those stars are all doing that. And they're running a fusion cycle inside their core. And eventually they do run out of fuel and then they explode. And that's a supernova. So we got to get out of the solar system before that happens. Luckily, we have 4 billion years to do that. But, 4 billion years is a long time, but really we got problems to solve like in the next 40 years on Earth that will tell us whether or not we even have that opportunity.
How stable is what you're doing in creating this fusion reaction? In other words, we have from science fiction, from fantasy, from books and movies and our collective consciousness, when we say fusion power, that it is incredibly unstable, and that if you screw up, Bob, we all die. Is this, you're laughing, but if you screw up, do we all die? Does it leave a giant crater? If you're using 3,000 microwaves to heat up this hydrogen, what happens if it goes wrong?
Yeah, the way to think about it is, people think of like things being really, really hot, right? Like they think about like lava, like you've got, lava like melting through something. And then that's how, you can depict things. And if you're, Doc Ock or something. But the reality is that the total amount of energy inside this plasma that's in a fusion system is only like the same amount of energy in like a pot of boiling water. It's actually not much energy. It's just very, very hot. It's like you have a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of mass that's very, very hot. And so it's less like lava and more like a candle, like in the wind. And literally you can blow it out. So, if you, the way that one of the problems in fusion is it constantly keeps going out. And so you have to really create these conditions that are completely not on Earth. They're in space, right? Like stars are in space. You don't walk through the forest to find a star. So like you have to recreate that on Earth, which means it's a fairly complicated machine, just to enable the life support for it to go.
Okay, so when we get back from this quick break, I want you to describe for the audience what this machine, this fusion reactor, would look like, and what is the hardware and the components of it in order to make this reaction occur with the right temperature, the right pressure, and the right heating in order to create that reaction. We get back on This Week in Startups. As somebody who's invested in over 250 startups, oh my God, has it been that many? Well, I want to talk to you about a serious pain point that I see all the time with my startups. Too high of a burn. They're just spending too much money, and the runway is too short. One of the things that people have spent a ton of money on these days is buying SaaS products. Great idea. Make your company more efficient. But what if you're buying too many? What if you're not using some and then you're wasting all this time integrating them together? Well, there is finally a solution, and the solution is Odoo. Odoo.com/twist. That's odoo.com/twist to get $1,000 in credits. That's right, $1,000 in credits. Odoo is a fully customizable and fully integrated suite of software that lets you build and scale your stack as you build and scale your business. It's simple, it's modular, and you only pay for what you use, and you can just add components as you grow. You can do project management, invoicing, sales, marketing automation, help desk, timesheets, inventory, and so much more. For example, their accounting products are perfect for anyone who upgraded from Excel or QuickBooks, but doesn't want to break the bank with some of the more expensive options out there. And they're going to give you $1,000 right now on your first implementation pack. That's right. Not a joke. They're going to give you $1,000. They really want you to try the product. Odoo.com/twist. Check it out. Odoo.com/twist. Welcome back to This Week in Startups. Bob Mumgaard is here. He is with Commonwealth Fusion Systems, which is CFS.Energy. There's a .energy domain name, apparently. They've raised $84 million in new investment recently. I read about that, and I just thought this would be something amazing to get you on the pod and talk about it. Okay, so we understand what a fusion reaction is, sort of. It's what occurs in the sun. It requires a massive amount of energy to turn hydrogen and create this reaction. I think we're in sync so far, right?
Yep.
Okay, now explain to me what this reactor is that does this and why it doesn't already exist. If we've done this, we know it exists, and we've done various permutations on it. What is this physical device going to look like, and how far are we away from having it?
Yeah. So the way to think about what this thing is it's basically like a magnetic bottle. So you use very strong magnets to bottle up the star. And so, people think it as like a sphere. It's actually, the other thing, donuts, right? Like Homer Simpson, what can donuts not do? Like one thing donuts do very well is they can make magnetic bottles. And if you build a machine, which is acronym and technical speak called tokamak, but it's by far the most researched thing, using a magnetic bottle. Yeah, tokamak. Yeah, thanks, Russian thing. But if you build one of these, and like you can build one of these in university, and there's like 155 of these that have been built. It's a magnetic bottle that inside in the donut, sort of the jelly of the donut, is the plasma. Very, very, very hot. And then it's very, very well insulated. It's compressed by the magnets. And we've done this over and over again, and we've gotten better and better and better at it. And if you actually look at the figure of merits that you need to do for fusion, like how hot you get it or how well insulated it is, we've actually beat Moore's law in almost all those figures of merit at places like Princeton and places like the national labs in the Bay Area and places in France, and people that do this for a living, entire departments at national labs that do this. So we've gotten a long way. We've come just from nothing to something that's sitting right below where you would have a plasma that would make more fusion power than it takes to heat it. And we've been sort of stuck there for a little while. And we've been trying to figure out, okay, how do we get past that? And really, we only had two options. And one of them was an option that was completely closed to us until just recently. And that's really where CFS comes in. And
so you have this donut-like reactor. It's a giant size. I'm looking at some images online of these. These have been in construction, and we've been working on these for how many decades? When did this work start? And what have we accomplished in these tokamak, Tokamak fusion reactors to date?
Yeah, so we started them. Actually the Soviets started them. It was a big deal in the détente era, right? Cold War. And international exchanges of scientists and, subterfuge and all of the spy stuff. And actually, by the 70s, we had made an international science effort to advance these. And we were able to do is to take them from, cold, not insulated plasmas all the way up to the point where they can make just under more power than it takes to run. So they've gone, from sort of like temperature of a flame to temperature of the sun in that amount of time. And we've now developed all of the understanding of how to make these things work. And it's actually like an incredible feat that physicists and engineers around the world have done, all funded by taxpayers and the open science sort of spirit, to be able to build these machines, predict how they work, and actually have them work according to the predictions, which is, when you've got something really, really good. We can't make drugs work according to predictions, but we can actually make 100 million degree plasmas work according to predictions.
So we've made 250 of these in the world. And the challenge now is to have the energy that it takes to run one of these be less than the energy coming out of it. That's where we are after 40 or 50 years of working on this. Is that right?
That's pretty accurate. And that's sort of like the point where it goes from being an interesting science experiment to this could be useful. And sort of from the bench to something out in the market. And, it's still got a little ways to go. We got some more work to do, but it was interesting enough. And the potential payoff is so big to be able to build an energy source like this. This is that going back to the pint glass, right? If every glass of beer powered everyone for their entire life, we wouldn't need that much beer, which is sort of sad analogy.
So you're aiming in 2025 to have one of these that reaches, is there a term for, net energy positive, just to say it in plain language?
Yeah, breakeven.
Breakeven, great. So we're almost at breakeven, and you have to get us past breakeven. And then is, just one notch above breakeven the breakthrough? Or is there you've got to get 10x past breakeven?
So if you think about where we've come from, so we've gone from, 13 orders of magnitude, 13 zeros behind the decimal place, almost nothing, to just below break even. And we got to get above break even and just a little bit beyond that. And we now know enough that you can design machines up there. And so I'm sure you've on what we're doing here, seen the ITER machine, the big, huge machine in France that they're building. That's all the nations of the world basically saying, hey, let's go build the largest construction project in Europe to get above break even in a tokamak. And the consensus is they can do it, but man, is it big and expensive. And that was really the only option we had when we decided to do that. And what we're doing at CFS is we found that there's, from a technology related to the magnet, I said it was a magnetic bottle, we found that you can make it much, much, much smaller, like factors of 50 smaller, by putting in this new type of magnet. And that's what we're doing now.
Got it. So the magnets could be the big unlock here. If we get the magnets right, then maybe it doesn't have to be as big or as costly. Is that what happens?
Exactly.
The efficiency?
Yep. It's like now you go from having to build something that's like the size of, an office block to something that, fits on a tennis court. And so this is in sort of the tough, think about tough technology, like hardware-based technology. This is the type of breakthrough you look for, right? This is something where you've got a good established science basis, underpinned by universities. You've got a new technology, that came in that suddenly changes the game, whether that's DNA and fast gene sequencing, right? Those types of things. And fusion, in fusion's case, we've gotten so far in the science, we have climate change bearing down on us, and we're sitting right below the point where it's useful. And all of a sudden this magnet comes up. Let's put these things together and let's change the scale. And that's really what led to CFS 2 years ago. So
the ITER fusion project, ITER, is this multidisciplinary or multi-country project in France that's building a giant reactor. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Funded by the EU and Japan and Russia and China and India, the United States, Korea. It's basically the industrialized world.
And it's, according to their website, it is 72% completion to first plasma. What does that mean?
So it's 72% completed to the point where they turn it on and they make a plasma inside of it that shows the machine works, but they've still got about 10 years to go beyond that before they start to make more power than it takes to run.
Got it. If you succeed in making these magnets a magnitude better, 10x better, 100x better, what do you have to do? Twice as good, 50% better?
Yeah, so in these machines, we built so many of them, we understand them well enough to know that the performance goes like the magnetic field to the fourth power. So a huge lever on it, right? And so even a factor of 2, you're talking about, a factor of 16 on the other side. So we're aiming for just a factor of 2, which was granted a factor of 2 beyond what people have been working on for a long time. But a new material allowed us to do that.
Got it. And they're spending $20 billion on the ITER project?
More, yeah.
Wow. That's incredible. And so if you succeed in your mission to make the magnets better, you could potentially upgrade the magnets in what they're doing, or they could leverage your technology, or you'll be building. I guess the question is, and you can answer this on the other side of our quick sponsor break, is how many of these and at what scale do we need to build them? Will there be one per country? Will there be one per state? Will there be one per city? One per neighborhood? What is the footprint in 20 years of fusion reactors in America and around the world if you succeed when we get back on This Week in Startups? Hey, everybody. I want to take a minute to thank Embroker for sponsoring This Week in Startups and supporting us all year long. What a great company. And it's very simple. You need to have insurance. I don't know how many times I got to talk to you about this. You have to have insurance for your company. It's time to grow up, and it's time to save money and to do it online, quickly and easily. Embroker's technology will let you save a ton of time and a ton of money prices are 20% lower, and you get better coverage than all these crazy incumbents who are slow. That's not what you want. You want cyber insurance, so if you get hacked, you're covered. You want D&O insurance, directors and officers. You're the officers of the company, not like police officers. Officers as in executives, and directors are the people on your board. You need D&O if you're going to have a board, if you're going to have officers in a company, so that if something happens and you get sued, you're going to be covered. And errors and omission insurance. This is called E&O. This means if you make a mistake. And major customers are going to ask for E&O insurance if they want to buy your product. And finally, this employment practices liability, EPL. So you're going to talk to your attorney about cyber, D&O, E&O, and finally EPL. And the best place to get insurance today is at embroker.com/twist, EMBROKER.com/twist, where if you use the offer code TWIST, you will get 10% off. They do a great job. They do many of my companies. Embroker.com/twist. Get that 10% off using the offer code TWIST. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to This Week in Startups. Bob Mumgaard is here. Commonwealth Fusion Systems, CFS Energy, CFS.Energy. So when we left and we were talking about, God, the ITER, am I pronouncing that correct? ITER, ITER. That $20 billion project is going on. They're just getting, I guess, they're 70% of the way to having the plasma flowing, which means it works. You're working on the magnets to make all of these around the world better. So if you succeed with your magnets, I guess you become the source of magnets, or you're making your own proprietary reactors. Is that the business model here? What's the business model for you? And then how does it manifest in the real world when you and I are in our 60s or 70s? I'm not sure how old you are, but we're 20 years from now, 30 years from now, is there going to be one of these in everybody's backyard or in everybody's DeLorean or Tesla? Or is it going to be like one, per country? Or
yeah, it's a good question. And I think, to tackle the question of like, what does it mean to do it at scale, which is, really what we're talking about here. It's like, what do you have to do at scale for the energy system? I think, there's some like crazy numbers if you think about it. It's the energy system's the largest market in the world. Like, just oil and gas, publicly traded oil and gas companies, largest in the world, are only a tiny fraction of the entire energy market. And so to solve climate change, we're talking about replacing trillions and trillions of dollars of energy infrastructure with something that doesn't emit, where what we have today, we know we have to get rid of it. And so that's the level of market opportunity that all of the clean tech sides are going after. And what fusion really allows you to do is you basically can build a machine that's big enough to power like a town. It's not like a machine that's like power an entire region or city. It's like the size of the way we power our stuff today. It's like you go and you see a gas plant. It's like, oh, you put a fusion machine there and you get rid of the pipeline and you get rid of the smokestack. And that machine, if you know how to build it, its fuels are equally accessible to everybody. So it's a machine that makes power from effectively nothing. And so it's like a complete reimagining of the way we do energy. Like one way to think of it is, up till now, we've done energy through like hunter-gatherer style. Like we have like rooted around
into the ground.
You like dig, or you like wait to trap the wind or the sun, right? And what this is like, okay, build it. If you got the blueprints, if you got the tools to build it, you can build it, you can run it, and you get energy. And that's a really, it's like, why is fusion in all the sci-fi? It's because that's profound. And what we're trying to do is to try to make that into something that then can be, a product, right? It's not a giant international project. Good luck to them. That's great. But it's something that it's not quite like put in your basement, but it's something that you could put into the existing infrastructure as we turn over the infrastructure to clean energy.
And what do you think the timetable is for that? If you were to, bet your life savings on it, because you've already bet your career, it seems, and your entire reputation on it. So we might as well ask this question, like, you're all in on this. What is if we were to pick an over-under to a city, but one city in the world is powered, 100,000 people, 1 million people, something in that range. But let's pick a town. 100,000 people in a town are powered by a fusion reactor and fusion energy. Am I referring to it properly? Fusion technology, or is it called nuclear fusion technology?
Fusion energy is the
fusion energy is the proper way you would say it. Why do people say nuclear fusion technology?
That's a good question. It's a bit redundant, right? Fusion is a nuclear reaction, but it's the opposite reaction of the one everyone's used to. So, it's confusing to refer to it as nuclear often because like nuclear is synonymous with fission, with splitting the atom. It's like, and we don't refer to, burning something as chemical combustion. So we call it fossil fuel energy, right? And it's fusion energy.
So fusion energy, when will a town, if you had to pick an over-under, if we were to make a betting line, what year is that? That 1 million populous city is powered by one of these?
It's a really, really good question. And, if you were to go back even just 5 years ago and ask that question, the answer would unanimously be, it's like after 2050. It's like, 2060, somewhere in there.
30, 40 years. Got it. 3 or 4 decades of work.
Yeah. But what we see now, and one of the things that's driving money in the space and then causing the flywheel to accelerate in fusion is that there are legitimate technology approaches that could push that significantly earlier. Is it 2025? No. Is it 2030? Well, if we hit everything right, maybe. Is it 2035? There's some good chances on the table to do that. And so that's a big change in how people have thought about this technology and where you see governments accelerating their investment, passing new legislation about it, where you see research.
How much has to be invested? If we were to pick a number, is it $1 trillion, $100 billion? What would have to be invested to make that an almost certainty? And nothing in life is certain, but is there a number where you said, hey, if we put $100 billion or $250 billion or even $1 trillion or $10 trillion towards this, it's going to happen?
Yeah, it's billions, but not tens of billions.
So for as little as $10 billion, we could make this a certainty, which then leads me to wonder why is every government, and we're in the middle of a stimulus package spending trillions of dollars, and people are spending tens of billions of dollars on solar. Why are we not just giving 10 teams in America $1 billion each?
Yeah, first, it's not clear.
Or are we doing that?
We to some extent, we are increasing investment. And in fact, right before the end of the year, they passed a fusion bill, first time in a long time, that was part of the energy package. It said, hey, let's put cost shares and competition from federal money going out to try to do basically what we did with SpaceX and Orbital and building rockets. Let's try to do that in fusion. Because there's enough people, there's about 20 companies that are doing this. There's about $2 billion of private investment already in the space. So let's put a little bit more on there and see where this can go in the short term. Like who's got legs to take the next step, where the next step in many cases is either, aiming for just above, breakthrough, like going beyond breakeven, like CFS or getting ready to do that, for other companies. And so you're seeing that come in both from the private side and from the government side. And it's not clear that, dumping $100 billion is a good idea in this space, right? There's only so many trials that you can do. There's only so much you can do within reason on speed. But it's at the starting gate.
Which is interesting because I don't know if you remember this during the Obama era, Solyndra, Tesla, they all received, a couple of $1 billion, couple of $100 million to see if, we could actually get electric cars on the road. And Fisker and Solyndra and famously all those things went bust. But Elon paid back all those loans early. And if they had been equity, can you imagine if even 1% or 10% of that money was equity versus a loan, that would have paid off and the government would have made a profit on it? So our government, at the end of 2020, I understand Trump, in the COVID relief, put in like $325 million in financing for fusion energy, something very modest. And they're matching those dollars. Is that the idea? They're going to match the dollars?
Yeah, so that's one idea, and that's the idea that was in the fusion bill. Is that it's actually modeled just after Elon's other play on SpaceX, which is hey, these companies are trying to do something really hard. If they do it, let's give them take the receipts and pay them back like half. So match on milestone based reimbursement. which, is very, very successful. You look at the Crew Dragon dropping off people at the International Space Station. You're like, oh, that is a direct result. Of doing this. And even in that case, the taxes that have been paid on just building those rockets actually paid back what the government spent to run that program.
When we get back from this final break, I want to know what country has the best chance of becoming the leader in this space. If not America, France, China, who has the intelligence in terms of people like yourself, colleges like MIT, whatever. I'm not sure where the fusion energy brain trust comes from. I want to know if we are educating enough brain power, because at the end of the day, what I know about startups is you're only as good as your team. I want to know who's got the best funnel of intelligent team members in the world to make fusion happen and to save the goddamn planet when we come back on This Week in Startups. Do you ever wish that you got to invest in some of the best performing IPOs of 2019 and 2020? I bet you do. Well, OurCrowd investors did get a chance to invest in many of those amazing IPOs. With OurCrowd, accredited investors can invest directly and easily in startups early before they IPO, before they get bought. In fact, OurCrowd investors have benefited from companies IPOing like, wait for it, Beyond Meat. That's an incredible company. And some of the companies have been acquired by buyers like Intel, Nike, Microsoft, and Oracle. Their in-depth due diligence process includes meeting with management teams and a comprehensive vetting of deals they decide to invest in. Today, you can join OurCrowd's investment in NanoLock Security. This is a company offering IoT, the Internet of Things, cyber protection. This includes billions of low-end devices that other technologies cannot protect. NanoLock is the only device-level protection that has both near-zero power requirements and is operating system agnostic. You can get in early at NanoLock and other unique opportunities at ourcrowd.com/twist. The OurCrowd account is free, and you get to read all these great deal memos. Just go to OurCrowd.com/twist. Okay, let's get back to this amazing episode. Welcome back to This Week in Startups. My mind is blown. Forget about nuclear, forget about solar, forget about wind for a second. Fusion is the long game. There is no other solution out there that comes close to this. Correct, Bob?
That's what we think, yeah.
I mean, is there anything when you go and debate, energy, after having a couple of pints in Boston with a bunch of brainiacs from Harvard and MIT, whatever, is there any other technology that somebody says, forget fusion, this is going to be the solution? Or is it
not on it?
Everybody universally agrees fusion is the holy grail?
Yeah, it's in the long game, everyone always gets there. It's like, if you want to take the population of the Earth and you want to put them at the level of sustainability, or the level of energy use, the level of their lifestyle that you can get in the West, and you want to do that sustainably, and you want to recycle everything and make the economy circular, and you don't want to ruin the planet, like that amount of energy is a lot. And there is, even if you think about, and I'm a big pro solar person, big pro wind, even if you think about the long game on those, eventually you've got a lot of solar and wind. And it's sort of at a level that's like, oh man, that is a lot. So fusion everyone always gets there. Eventually it's like, okay, SimCity 2000, the final power plant you got was fusion for a reason. It's like, right. That's where it goes. The question is, can you get there soon enough? And who's going to get there first?
So that leads me to what I've learned about building startups, which is you're only as good as the talent that can join your team. And is that the same in your line of work, fusion energy? And if so, where do fusion energy scientists and entrepreneurs come from? Who is the number one source of those brainiacs?
Yeah, so it's an international effort, right? So there's people that are working on this all over the world. Basically, you get to a certain level and countries start to invest in this. And so China's got a big effort pouring money in. The Europeans are building the largest fusion machine ever attempted. The UK is doubling down to get their industry on board with fusion. But really, the United States, we have a really, really fundamental advantage, which is it's not just, fusion brainiacs, like people that know how stars work and plasma physicists, and we like those people a lot, but it's also people that know how to build companies and build ecosystems to take those scientific results and as quickly as possible pull them out and put them into a package that can then be supercharged with finance and with manufacturing and going. And that, I think the US is clearly the leader so far. And I think you're seeing it accelerate, and you're seeing entities, like CFS really, take advantage of the people that came before in clean tech, right? You see more and more money coming into clean tech. You see more and more funds that are allocating significant parts of their portfolio to these types of technologies. You're seeing more venture capitalists understanding what it takes to build bits, go from bits to atoms and how to transition that. And you're also seeing talent like coming out of the forges of like SpaceX. 30% of CFS is SpaceX alumni of some sort, right? You're coming out of companies that have now done this a few times, either from the clean tech, back before the recession, or from the Musk companies in aerospace, or even medical devices and things. You're starting to see a confluence of all that happening in the United States. And it's not just in fusion, it's in technologies that are across the energy spectrum.
If I'm correct, scientists who understand the fusion reaction are but one component here. You need material science scientists and financiers and people who have figured out how to get raw science, material science, and actually result in a product as well. So it's not just about the scientist, brainiac. It's also the person who knows how to package this. For you to get a customer, your customer would be a state in the United States, correct?
No, actually, if you look at like who buys power plants or who buys power, it's a surprise. Yeah. Most people don't know where their power comes from. So you have everything from utilities, traditional like Con Ed, sort of stodgy,
which are quasi-government, or they're private companies that are government regulated.
Yeah, they're government regulated, and it really depends on where you are. Like if you're in the Southeast United States, it's heavily government regulated. If you're where I am, it's actually a fairly open market. You have, private infrastructure investors, big pension funds that own power plants, basically. And you also have people like Google and Amazon or Ford who buy power. And so when you see like Google say, okay, we want to go and be 100% clean energy, like they're out there, underwriting the financing and spending the money to get things built that are power plants. And then they write a contract to take the power.
In fact, Google said not only do they want to be carbon neutral, they said they want to be they want to pay for all the carbon they've used in the history of Google, if I remember correctly. And then they want to be a net, what would it be, that they're removing carbon from the atmosphere, like on a net basis?
Yeah.
They would like to be net positive on that. So in a way, your customer is ultimately going to be those server farms with all of our data on them. And our Gmail.
A lot of people don't realize this, but when you're surfing on your phone, like the power your phone uses it's not the power that's coming from your charger overnight. The power your phone uses is all those giant data centers, and it's quite a bit of power, and it's not going to go down. And same way, you want to recycle, our electronics and turn them into new products instead of dumping them across the ocean. Like, you're going to need a lot of power to do all this. And this is now seen, broadly as we're going to need lots and lots of electricity. We're going to need lots and lots of heat, and we're going to need to do all that without emissions. How far are you
away from selling Google on buying 10 reactors from you?
Yeah, it's still a little early for that. Like proof is in the pudding. Like, okay, we've been working on this a long time. We talked about how we've been doing this for decades, but we think we're really close. We're the type of people at MIT. It's like, okay, let's push it across the line. Let's show up somewhere where you can push a button, make a star in a bottle that makes more power than it takes to run, gets everything real hot to the point you got to shut it down, pour water on it and cool it off again, and then go again. And at that point, that's the point that you start to say, okay, now let's start to find where we're going to build the first one and harness that heat and turn it into electricity or turn it into products.
I think that a Google, Facebook, Amazon would love to make an early bet on you and say, hey, I'll give you $100 million for the first two or whatever. What do you think one of these reactors will cost? Obviously the first one's going to cost billions of dollars in terms of research up until now. And I think the United States, based on a note I have here, has put $50 billion into fusion already over 50 years or something. So the first one will cost theoretically $50 billion, but you're going to amortize that over 500 of these. So what do you think they'll retail for, to power some giant data center? I'm sure it depends is the answer, but ballpark, are these going to be worth $1 billion each? And how does that compare to building a nuclear reactor, which I think is really what you're up against, right? This is going to be compared to building a solar farm, a wind farm, a nuclear reactor, or one of those. Am I correct?
Yeah, and that's ultimately the beautiful part about fusion, right? Is that, or actually all of energy. The beautiful part about all of energy is the metrics. Like you build a plant, you add up what it costs to build, you amortize it about how much energy it uses, and that's a commodity. It comes out of a wire with electrons. And so the good thing about fusion is it's a machine that makes power without fuel, and it makes a lot of power out of a relatively small machine. And so when you add it all up, it looks very, very competitive if you can get it down the scale that we're aiming to get it. You're still, in these cases, investing the better part of $1 billion to build one of these. But that's something that people do all the time. Like, a solar farm, a good utility scale solar farm is $1 billion. Yes. And so this is in the channel that people are used to doing from a finance, from a procurement, from a building perspective. So
they're not going to be shocked when they see your price tag and the 10 cents or 7, 8 cents, 9 cents a kilowatt hour that nuclear cost. This will be similar or much cheaper.
Yeah. Aiming to be cheaper than that. Aiming to be, below 5 cents a kilowatt hour.
So if 5 cents a kilowatt hour happens for fusion, and nuclear is currently like 10 cents, I think, and it's going down to 9 maybe, or 8 is the target. And you do 5, what does that do to nuclear reactors and solar? And I guess solar and wind would be much more than nuclear?
Depends on where you build them. Really depends on where you build them. But the really important thing here is that, if you get into the right ballpark, like we have to build all of the above. Like, we talked about the trillions and trillions of dollars that have to be replaced in infrastructure for fossil fuels. Like, it doesn't matter what fossil fuels cost anymore. We're not going to let people build them, right? So we're going to build something, and we're going to build the thing that's most cost effective for the application that's there. So if you're like in the middle of a desert, build solar farms, right? But if you're, outside of a major metropolitan area with a big industry or a data farm or things like that, you need to think about, what's that look like? Is that a gas plant? Well, maybe that's not the right approach anymore. Maybe that's a fusion plant in the future. Maybe that's a nuclear plant. Coal,
natural gas, they're done in our lifetime. 20, 30 years from now, the idea and right now, am I correct that solar and wind and renewables are cheaper to build, and we've sort of crossed that Rubicon now?
Yeah, we've crossed that Rubicon for many places in the United States. Yeah.
Yeah. So nobody's building gas power plants and coal plants to, generally speaking. Nuclear is kind of frozen. People are scared of building nuclear, but we're going to have a couple of more nuclear plants in the United States. Is the plan?
Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah. So it'll be a 3-horse race, if I'm reading you correct, between fusion, nuclear, and renewables, and all 3 of those could be part of the mix. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're already seeing, people gear up for that and figure out what the future of the grid looks like. And it's a really exciting time to be in energy. It's an exciting time to be in climate, super impactful. Like, you want to do something in your life, like probably, climate sustainability energy is it's an area where you can make a really big impact. And then on top of all that, even within energy itself, there's lots of really good ideas. And fusion is now in the mix in a way that it just wasn't 5 years ago.
If you succeed in building this, one of the biggest offenders for our climate, and this sounds crazy, and I think a lot of people don't know this, but there is a very small number of cargo ships on the planet. And they spew, from my understanding, a type of fuel that is incredibly dirty to get these containers from China to the EU and to America. And I don't know if there's 30 or 40 of them that are in constant. I just had the CEO of Flexport on, who manages like all these, the transit of all these shipping containers. Is it on the roadmap to put a fusion reactor on a giant cargo ship and power it? Or is that too insane to put those on over the water?
It's not necessarily like technically the something you would couldn't do. Like, you could figure out if you built the ship big enough and stuff that safety wise, there's no reason you wouldn't do it. But, we have other ways to solve those types of problems. Like, if you use a fusion plant or a heat source effectively to make fuel, right? Like if you make fuel, then you can close and make that the whole system zero carbon, right? Like, okay, like that's a way to do it. Or make hydrogen even, in which case you close the whole thing for zero carbon and the smokestack is water instead of particulates. And so there's some really good ideas in the energy system
to then make hydrogen energy.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Fascinating.
And people are looking into doing that, with renewables and with nuclear. And this is, I think, an underappreciated fact by a lot of people is, okay, like we're going to electrify everything we can, right? Let's get EVs. Like, GM, they're going to stop making gasoline cars in 2035. EVs. Well, just because you have an EV, if you plug it in, where does your electricity come from? Okay, we got to change all that to be zero carbon. Oh, but there's stuff like how to fly on planes, which we don't do right now, but I assume we're going to get back to that. It's like, how do you make that zero carbon? Or how do you make steel zero carbon? All of that stuff, agriculture, you grow your crops. How do you do zero carbon agriculture? All of that is all right for innovation right now, with effectively the largest market pull in history.
Amazing. If you look at those container ships, they're the size of like 6 football fields, and they produce, I just looked it up, the same amount of pollution as 50 million cars. That is bonkers. When people are looking at them, just to think the amount of mileage of your gas powered car is insignificant to getting one of those container ships to flip over to something sustainable. And so are you super positive that humanity is going to beat climate change with fusion? If we just get fusion right, climate change is a non-issue, correct?
I think that fusion is definitely has a chance to do that, but I'm actually super positive on fixing climate change overall. Like, I'm part of the fusion as part of the mix. I'm CEO of a fusion company. Like, we're going full speed as hard as we can. But I also don't think it's right to be, fatalistic about this, that you have a lot of people that are like me and like our team who are trying all these different things. And like, if with a little bit of creativity around finance, a little bit of support, like you're seeing people do things that we didn't think were possible before. And, I think that we just, we are in this middle of this pandemic, and we started the show talking about, getting rid of all the cars. Like, okay, we got rid of all the cars, cities got clean, but we only reduced carbon by 10%. But still, it's 10%. Like we only have to do that 10 times over, right? Yeah. It's not like inconsequential. And at the same time, we've managed to shorten the time to a vaccine through science and through engineering and through finance, right?
Right.
And like, that's the same type of thing that we need to do for climate. And you're starting to see funds that are just pure climate funds. You're starting to see collectives of entrepreneurs that are doing this.
Lower Carbon Fund, which is an investor in your company. I don't know when he came in, but so your company has raised $250 million to go after this, correct?
Yeah, somewhere around there.
You have 100 people, 200 people working there?
I think right now it's about 130.
You will not have a commercial product until 15 years from now? 10 years from now?
10 years. Well, we won't have the fusion commercial product until 10 years from now. Of course, we're always doing really interesting things, but we're aiming at the fusion thing as the primary thing.
Got it. So you might have some revenue source between then and now.
Yeah.
Maybe selling some parts to other people building stuff, if I had to take a guess.
And parts are useful for other things besides fusion. So things like that, yeah.
And building one of these tokamaks, is that what they call tokamak?
Close enough, yeah.
No, you say it. I want to make sure I get it right so I can say it at a dinner party.
Tokamak.
Tokamak. So is building a tokamak like a huge carbon footprint, or is it just like building a building?
Yeah, it's effectively, it's funny. It's like we're getting ready to build our net energy tokamak called Spark, and it's a building. First and foremost, it's a shed. It's like a shed, like any other shed, and it's full of equipment. That's like kind of a weird mix of equipment, but none of it is crazy specialized in terms of it's like stuff you find in arc furnaces and things, which you can get. And then at the core of it is this fusion machine that is, a machine that's made out of metal. It's machined out of steel. And it's the same type of people that build rockets. And we got a lot of people that build rockets on staff. And so it's following in that same mold. But of course, the energy payout in something like this is so big because the fuel that you're talking about, is so inconsequential, and the machine makes so much power. It's like it's a tennis court that's replacing miles of solar panels.
Bonkers. And now, are you going to be putting these on rocket ships as well? And is this how we get to Mars? I've heard Elon talk about fusion being a component of getting to Mars, but it's not required. But it would certainly be a boost, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we don't typically look that far out. There's actually some fusion companies that that's part of their business model. For us is like the fact that we've got to build 10,000 power plants, no matter what they are on Earth, to solve climate change. The fact that fusion could be a part of those 10,000 power plants, that's enough for us.
If there was one thing that could be done in society that would advance your mission, what would it be? Is it educating more people? Is it getting you more resources? Is it regulation? What do you need to be removed from your path that will accelerate this? Because I think we all want to see this accelerated. So when you wake up every morning, are there things you say, if we just didn't have this regulation, or if we just had this much more money, or if we just had this many more smart people, or we just had this raw material, is there something there that would accelerate your process? Or is this just heads down, we've got to do the work and it's going to take time?
Yeah, it's head down, do the work, and then frankly, there's like death by 1,000 cuts, right? So it's like, regulation is a little bit, it slows you up a little bit here, slows you up a little bit there, and then really, the big thing on a lot of this is a really vibrant ecosystem, right? Mm-hmm. If we can build, and we're seeing it in the United States, and hopefully as we come out of the pandemic and we see investment in recovery, that these ecosystems are really smart people, interdisciplinary people attacking this problem with the finance behind them, whether that's from government loans or government grants, or that's from, special carve-outs of long-term, mutual funds and investment funds or venture capital that are willing to go into longer terms. Like all of that is all part of this solution. It helps fusion. It also helps other things. And that's what we want to see more of. And I think you're starting to see that happen, even just in the last year. I mean, like we closed a $85 million round, like when oil was going negative, and one of our investors in that round was Equinor, the big Norwegian oil company. And so you're seeing people turn to this, and we'd like to see that accelerate. Interestingly,
when you look at what you're doing, there is a device in financial markets of the early investors getting taken out by later stage investors. So I'm curious if you've thought about your decade one investors being the venture industrial complex, but decade two being the people who do SPACs or private equity or, those large funds taking out the earlier investors. So if a venture firm has a 10-year horizon for a return, I wonder if you're on a 20-year timetable, if in year 10, the investors can turn over, right?
So in our case, like we even predated this. Our venture funds that are investors in us, people like Bill Gates's Breakthrough Energy Ventures or Steve Jurvetson's Future Ventures, like those funds are actually built to be 20-year funds. Like the idea of like a 10-year venture capital fund is sort of like a perversion of what venture capital started out as. Like we started out venture capital building chips, right? In Silicon Valley Silicon. For a reason. Like
HP.
Building big machines that made other machines. Yeah, exactly. And building machines that built other machines. And it sort of migrated into, well, we're going to do software.
Apps.
And then apps. Yeah. It's like, that's all great and everything. But, there's still a whole lot out there that, people experience their life, not just, sort of in the pandemic, it's sort of like only on a computer screen. But you think about the variety of stuff that underpins our society. And most of that stuff is atoms, and most of that stuff is at some point going from science into a product, and that takes time. It takes head down. It takes a coalition around them around the entrepreneur, of talent and of regulation, and of government and of long-term investors and all of that. And I think we've seen that engine in the United States really rev up over and over again, and clean tech and infusion is doing it again.
when your customers are looking at this and trying to figure out how to contextualize what's about to happen, it turns out I'm trying to think of the second order impact of what you're doing. So anytime this technology gets made, there's some things that happen that are either unintended, in a bad way or a great way. If you look at clean water and you look at clean water as a function of energy, right? Like if you just take desalination, that's energy, right? Taking salt is just energy. You got to get the membrane, you got to use gravity, whatever it is to get the salt out. Then you look at food. Food is about water and about energy on the margins, right? There's some energy used, like you mentioned agriculture, but really water is a big part of that. The sun, right? And so being able to have greenhouses, that have light in a world where energy becomes free or close to free, because that's really what this does, right? Energy is going to get close to free or a magnitude cheaper, half.
Yeah. Eventually it'll get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper as you get better and better at building it. But, we always try to avoid from free. Like you still have to build stuff. Still breaks down. You got to fix it. But
you're saying maybe half.
Yeah. It could get cheap. And more importantly, like the externalities, even when they're priced in of carbon and pollution, still don't make it more expensive than we're paying today.
Does this mean we could solve water and food security as well as part of energy?
So, the way that we describe it, like, companies got sort of, this collection of really, really fun, bright people have, got 10 things we know to be true, right? Like what do we absolutely know about? And one of them is that in the end, the only two markets are energy and gray matter, right? Like energy and creativity. And you can basically, with enough energy, you can reduce things to that. Right? Mm. That's like the equivalent of your server farm running all the computers and AI, right? It's like, okay, energy and gray matter. And so, you start to run things out on, you could desalinate and you could make enough water. You could do vertical greenhouses near the point of consumption with LEDs inside to take electricity and turn it. Yeah, you can see lots of things.
Like literally whatever the most expensive crop is could be made in vertical farms with energy right at like the source. And then you start thinking about like there are deserts in the world and they could be, if you desalinized and we just took some of the water out of the ocean, which there's plenty of course, desalinizing, you can kill some wildlife and there's brine and there's issues, but those are all surmountable. You could take swaths of desert in Africa, in America, in the Southwest, and over time convert them into rainforests or forests. And if I'm correct, and I'm no genius at this, forests are good for global warming. Trees absorb carbon, correct? Like this is a good part of, if we had more trees, that would be better. So
yeah, you could see and this, the more energy that we have that doesn't come with consequences for future generations, for the environment, the more we can do and think about these types of things, right? We want to remove the constraint of sort of searching around and dealing with the downsides of producing large energy flows, whether that's going out and having to drill in the middle of the ocean or whether that's the carbon that's in the air. And these energy sources, both renewables and fusion down the line, allow you to do this at a bigger and bigger scale. And that we think that's not just the solution for climate change. That's a truly sustainable solution long term.
It's crazy when you think about, we could be sitting here in 40 years and this entire oil infrastructure that we've built, from the cars to the pipelines to the rigs out in the middle of the ocean, they're all going to be deprecated. There'll be no use for them. There'll be like some vestige of like a world that our children's children will not even be able to understand. Like, what was that?
Yeah, well, think about the last oil
the ocean.
Yeah, think about the last time that you ever heard of anyone lighting up a whale-oiled lamp, right?
Yeah.
It was probably good that we stopped doing that. And,
wow, just the number of people off Nantucket who lost their lives getting those whales, the number of whales who died to make us, be able to read past sunset. I mean, and it really is incredible.
Light bulb powered by coal at the time was a really good idea. Well, maybe we should stop building the coal. We still need the light bulb, though. And, it's sort of the evolution of progress, in a sense, to more and more benign ways to make our lives better. And really, crux of, we look at it as the next battle for our generation is to do that with zero carbon energy.
Hey, Bob, I just want to tell you, I appreciate you and thanks for doing this. I don't mean to get cheesy and stuff like that, but you get to, our age, you have kids and you worry about the planet. You worry about the planet that, they're going to inherit. And people like you and your team are busting your asses to save the goddamn planet. And I think that that's just tremendous. So thank you. And I'm sure you're toiling away and nobody's saying anything to you and there's no high fives, but we owe you a debt to do this. This is important work and you're hiring, correct?
Oh yeah, definitely hiring. And it's a really good time to look at, those types of problems and say hey, what do I want to do after the pandemic? What am I going to go work on? And we think energy is certainly a fulfilling way to do it.
I may want to put $1 million in this. I may want to put $1 million or $2 million in this. When's the next round coming around? I may need to try to get my beak wet here, Bob. Put a couple of million in this and make me sleep well at night, knowing I'm not just investing in apps.
Well, we're building the magnet now. So basically in June, we'll turn on the world's strongest magnet. And that's twice what it was before. And at that point is really the go point to build the Spark tokamak, the net energy fusion tokamak. And we got a team ready to go. We got building permits coming, and we're getting ready to do it. So it'll be sometime.
That's got to be an interesting one when you show up at the building and you file your stuff, and you're like, "Hey, here's my paperwork. I'm building a fusion reactor," and the person's like, "Okay, let me look that up." And there's no page that says what your requirements are for a fusion reactor. What happens when you submit a fusion reactor to City Hall? Do they even know what to ask you?
You typically talk to them first.
Yeah, but do they understand?
Not a cold call.
But they don't understand what you're building, right? This is the first time anybody's ever come and said, "Can I build a fusion reactor here?" The
good news is we built so many of these before that you can come see them. So the first
the tokamaks you've built before, right? So they're not scared to death.
Yeah. You can actually come crawl over it at MIT, which is where we the previous record setter is that we evolved from. So we're not doing things that are completely outside of a comic book. There's some grounding in reality here.
When can I get one as an arc reactor to put in my chest like Iron Man and have unlimited fuel source? Don't answer.
Yeah,
we don't need that. We just need to get these server farms and these ships. And everything else off of it, and factories, etc. All right, listen, brother. Congratulations. If there's a chance to invest in this, man, let me wet my beak, because this would be a really great experience to be on the ride with you. Congratulations and thank you. And we'll see you all next time on This Week in Startups.